Guys, and welcome to our second part of lecture 5 on new product innovation. So in the last lecture we discussed about in the last part we discussed about CFT and sequential approach, and we listed down and talked about the disadvantages and advantages of both approaches. And in this video we'll keep it short. This is a part 2 of lecture 5, and we'll be continuing discussing a bit about CFT and sequential approach, and then lastly we'll talk about stages of change. So I hope to keep this short. In the next lecture we're going to get to something more practical, so we'll focus on supply chain management in a practical aspect, and we'll start with this diagram here, which will try to kind of let you guys and brainstorm some ideas about how to manage a kind of a smooth supply chain with elements of SMDC, and we'll talk more about that later on our new slide. So continuing our discussion on CFT and a traditional approach. So first of all, we know that CFT works best when there's a flexibility, when there's more uncertainty. This is because compared to the sequential approach, CFT is able to deal with customers' changes of preferences, changes in the market of the competitions, and so on and so forth. So you can see this graph, the blue line is basically the benefits using CFT, and the cost is the red line. So we can see when there's higher uncertainty, the benefits actually increase, because then it is a part of the CFT is actually more beneficial at much more compared to the traditional approach. Because in the traditional approach, there's actually no turn back when publish the product in the market and maybe it doesn't meet the consumer's demand and specifications. But however, in the CFT approach, when this the different departments are kind of doing concurrent engineering work. So when they publish a product in the market, they have tried a lot of attempts of manufacturing and marketing, so they actually know what product will be more popular in the market. That's why CFT is more beneficial when there's uncertainty. And although the cost increase, although there's a high coordination cost, or there's also waste, it can be quite wasteful and it can be more chaotic. But however, the beneficial will always cost a lot when it is successful in terms of product revenue. And in terms of uncertainties in the low level, if there's a really low uncertainty or zero uncertainty, then unfortunately the cost will actually outweigh the benefits, because traditional approach and sequential approach definitely saves a lot of cost if there's uncertainty, because all departments are not working together, and there's a lesser opportunity cost, which is a cost of the department when the department are working together. In the sequential approach, the department may be able to do some other stuff, like after the concept team finish the concept, after the design team finish the design, they can actually move on some new tasks rather than still kind of working on this product. So definitely there's higher opportunity cost, definitely more cost with CFT if there's a low uncertainty. Okay, so this graph below will focus on kind of showing us a mismatch relationship existing happening in the sequential and traditional approach. So what exactly about this mismatch is basically the mismatch between the flexibility and the cost and awareness, because as you can see, the flexibility to change the product and fix problems for a sequential approach is really low when the product is published into the market, because otherwise you'll incur high external cost by starting this product from the start, from the beginning once again. But however, at the end, this is also where the managers and the company have a higher awareness level on the product. So what do I mean by that? There's actually a contradiction. So the flexibility is actually higher when the product is still at the start stage, when the company just initiated the product, and the flexibility is the lowest when the product is launched in the market through the service stage. But however, the awareness to fix problems only happens in the last stage, because it may be really hard to identify problems related to the product within certain stages inside the approach, and only sometimes, most times, the high probability is that the problems can only be identified when the product is already published to the market. So then you'll be highly costly for the company to fix these problems, and the flexibility is really low. So definitely there's a mismatch there. So this is also a kind of an inspiration for companies to apply CFT, because in CFT, when the project time, there's always kind of equal flexibility because all departments are working together. there's a lesser, a much shorter risk exposure period from only within the service stage. While you can see this sequential approach has a long exposure period of risk starting from the design stage to the services stage when products launch in the market. So definitely it's much more risky, and here's a mismatch of flexibility and awareness. And in terms of CFT, basically these two lines I would say are equal. Basically I would say they are horizontally straight lines, because CFT is kind of maintaining the flexibility at every stage before the product is published in the market through marketing attempts, because it's concurrent engineering, simultaneous work, and definitely the cost to fix problems I think is quite equal, it's not really equal, but it's not fluctuating much. It can rise more when the product is, I would say, when there's higher uncertainty. But when there's higher uncertainty, you can see more benefits using CFT if your product is successful after kind of a trial and error. So you can see the cost fluctuate much less because it is high in average, but it doesn't fluctuate to as high as well. The sequential approach can reach when the product is not successful once it is made or published in the market. So that is a difference. So I would say CFT is a more stable method, but it really depends. As I mentioned before, if there's low uncertainty, sequential approach may save you a lot of money and may be more effective. But definitely CFTs are beneficial in two ways. First way is definitely to reduce the risk exposure period, and increase capability to solve problems and adjust to changes the customer's taste. And the second advantage is basically the inspiration and kind of a boost for innovations, because in CFT there's downstream and upstream communication both taking place, so there's a higher chance for innovations to take place that can produce a product for the company which is a competitive, sustainable product in the market. Okay, so these are the two graphs demonstrating some logic in the CFT and sequential approaches. And now lastly, we try to get to three stages of change. So how do we make this transition possible within the company? Because I mentioned before, customers' morale actually got decreased when CFT is implemented, because it can be a little bit chaotic, it can be confusing, it can be really fatigued, it can be really tired. It's like a trial and error. So even though some companies are smart, they adopt CFT for innovations, for flexibility, but it may not really work out. There may be higher costs compared to sequential approach, because the productivity level, the efficiency are fairly relatively low, so it might not be successful. Therefore, we have to implement and kind of work hard in these three stages, which we start always cognitive stage in the cognitive change, because first of all, we have to let the employees understand what the process is about and let them be prepared to take some certain actions to kind of work in this concurrent simultaneous process that can be challenging. So in this period, definitely incentive schemes should be adopted. Basically, incentive alignment refers to different incentives. It can be internal or external incentives, or kind of a non-monetary incentives. So most commonly, employers may give their employees a certain monetary incentive based on the Taylor's motivational theory: more money, more gain, more productivity. And sometimes the employees, if you are the manager, you can provide employees some certain perk benefits, such as the company rental for their home, payment of the education of the children, payment for certain insurances, something like that. You can give some perk benefits, some fringe, or maybe you give some bonus. This can work really well. The bonus can be motivational. So you kind of have to adopt you have to invest more money into your employees in order to try to increase your success rate working with your CFT approach. And then after that, we hopefully can reach a behavioral change for your company, which means employees in your company will be able to behave in a way that they are really prepared and working well in the CFT approach. So they have to constantly communicate with people in other departments, communicate with manufacturers, communicate with prototype team, communicate with the concept designers. And although some conflicts may happen, but definitely you as a manager, you have to kind of push this atmosphere for employees to work under this kind of a CFT, kind of a confusing, can be kind of a challenging and persistent working condition. After that, you have to implement some support, which are infrastructural support in terms of your personnel distribution, in terms of maybe where do you put your offices. These are really fundamental to increase your efficiency. Then you should install systematic infrastructure support. How do different teams communicate to each other? How do you save costs in between? Because when we send our design to the prototype and send to the manufacturer, some costs incur in these processes. How do we reduce this cost? So you have to build some business infrastructure in terms of the technology, analysis, in terms of communication, collaboration, and so on. And it can be more technical and organizational infrastructure support. So technical infrastructure relate to more like storage, like cloud storage, like system, and organizational support is more like those communications, collaborations that are also essential along with technical support. Okay, so this is about how do we actually implement CFT system. So by the end of this lecture, I hope what you guys understand is that CFT is definitely a more innovative and stable approach as you can take away from the lecture from these two videos. But however, the problem is CFT can be really difficult to be implemented, and although it works best under uncertainty, but as I mentioned just now, under the 3 stages of change, it can be really hard, not only in terms of employees, but in terms of a company's cost, company's cash flow, to maintain your coordinating cost, to reduce the coordinating cost while you are capable of producing a product successful in the market. It's actually quite hard. So in this video, I hope you guys actually understood and you had an introduction to what is a sequential approach and what is to an MPD flexible approach. But definitely, in order to dig deeper, once you work in a company, you have to think and consider many different aspects when you try to implement CFT. For example, how is your infrastructure going to work? How do you motivate your workers? And how are the technical aspects prepared? Because for both approach, you have to have a good product quality, and you should have the capability to produce a product. Otherwise, even with uncertainty, even with flexibility, your product may not be still popular in the market. Therefore, I think in a higher proportionally, I believe that today our conclusion is actually CFT is better than sequential approach. But how do we implement CFT can be still a really hard question, and could be a long way to go if you're a manager going to develop a product. So hopefully you learn something. Something from this lecture day. And in the next lecture, I promise you guys, we'll go on something more practical in supply chain management. We'll first start with a self-designed kind of a supply chain between our supplier, manufacturer, distributors, and customers. And we'll talk more. And hope you stay tuned. And if you have any questions, please comment in the YouTube comment section below. And I'll see you in the next video.